I've got the most fantastic team. It's really the most fun job I've had in as long as I can remember.
That sounds great.
Doesn't it? Just absolutely. What's interesting to me, of course, is that Landon has voice over IP in his background as well.
Yeah.
Did you guys know each other outside?
Not in the slightest. And in fact, I think the first time I met Oz, I remember it vividly. I had heard what he had been working on, and I tried to talk to Oz about voice over IP, and he would have none of it. He was done.
I'm afraid at that point I was running away from it as fast as I could.
Excellent. So, Landon, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I'll try to give you the quick story. I have a background in chemistry from ages ago. Was working as a research chemist. I'm showing my age a little bit, but I kind of realized one day that even though it's something that I loved and cherished, it was something that I probably shouldn't do. And I kind of will get into the story there. There's a bit of a story there, but I think let me suffice it to say that the kind of myth of the mad scientist is kind of true when it comes to chemists, and the rate of insanity is real. So I at the time there was this whole internet thing that was happening, and decided that was something that I wanted to jump into, and so I did that. Did a consulting business for a number of years. Jumped from there and worked in telecommunications. Doing all kinds of things, voice over IP, as we mentioned, IP television, ISP. We did at one point we did a wireless internet, licensed spectrum internet service, which was I think interesting is the appropriate word to use there. But I've always been really interested in virtual worlds. So again, kind of dating myself a little bit. I was into MUDs way back when, and just the act of creation and kind of the virtual space, and something I was really passionate about. Followed very closely what was happening in the kind of MMO space. In fact, I don't think we were calling them MMOs at that point. Just really, yeah, absolutely. And just really interested, and I can kind of go into a little bit about what interested me about virtual worlds and virtual spaces. But I had the opportunity, I think at the time was right, to join Linden Lab. I think Second Life was and is the place to explore those kind of ideas, and so I took the chance. I came to Linden Lab probably almost 8 years ago at this point. So it's been quite a ride, but loving every minute of it for sure.
I'm really interested that you have this crossover between chemistry and virtual worlds. Do you see any kind of common ground apart from madness?
I think about this a lot, and I really wish I could come up with a really interesting answer, but I don't. Like, in terms of what I was doing in chemistry and what we do at Linden Lab, I don't see a lot of kind of base overlap. One of the things that I used every day in chemistry, and what I continue to use in my job today, is just the underlying math can be really similar, particularly with regards to statistics. One of the things that, let me just step back for a second, roll back for a second. Like, one of the things that fascinates me about virtual worlds is that it is a human-created space, and so it gives you, but it's also part of the machine, right? It's in the computer, and so we have, lots of information, just like kind of like what we do with social networks about what is happening and how people are behaving. And so one of the things that really has always fascinated me is sociology, psychology, and economics. But what frustrated me about those disciplines back in my hard science days, back working as a chemist, it was very difficult, and it remains very difficult to do kind of hard science research on that. And I think virtual worlds is this kind of perfect collision of the kind of fuzzier side of science and the things that you can directly measure. And so, economics in particular is something that I am desperately interested in, and I think most economists just would drool to to see what is happening, directly measure what's happening in the Second Life economy.
That's an interesting thought, isn't it?
I think the disciplines are not as far apart as you think they are, at least based on my experience. I have a whole bunch of former chemists that I've worked with programming over the years. And I think the thought processes are very similar.
That's interesting.
Do you think they were all negotiating mazes of twisted little passages all alike at the same time?
Oh, well, we all do that.
So I think it's worth pointing out, though, is that I think that virtual worlds and Second Life in particular can be tremendous tools in teaching people about chemistry. One of the things that, in fact, I have a story. I will spare you the kind of gory details, but I had a professor in college who just put it quite plainly that everything that you needed to know about chemistry, this was actually organic chemistry, is summed up in two kind of principles. One is electronic effects, and that essentially means that negative or opposite charges that attract to each other and like charges that repel each other, and what steric effects, which essentially is oh God, did I crash on a Second Life?
No, you're
No, you're still with us presently. You might disappear at any moment.
I'm logging back in.
Can you still hear Landon, everyone? He's gone. No,
Yeah.
he's gone.
You won't hear him in voice now because he has actually vanished. You can come straight back in.
I'm coming in.
Okay. In the meantime, let's ask Oz. Here he comes. While he gets
already.
settled.
That was quick. That's full marks for speed.
Yes. And everyone was disappointed you puffed before you could tell us any gory details.
I think this gentleman has a secret past, actually. Don't you, Saffia?
I think it's possible. You'll have to put your voice back on.
Just adjust my volume here first.
And if you mute in-world voice, then you won't hear any echo from us.
Yep. I'm good.
And do you have a seat?
I am working on it.
Oh, it's come round again.
Do you want to tell us about the gory details while you wait for your seat to res?
Gory tales of what?
The chemistry professor.
Oh, yeah. So, sorry. So, I was talking about the electronic effects and the steric effects. And so,
Yes.
steric effects, essentially, it means that you can't fit a square peg through a round hole, right? And
Right.
like, if you can visualize what is happening in in a chemical reaction, like, will help you understand like whether or not something's going to work or what rate it would work, right? And so virtual worlds are can be a really powerful educational tool for chemists to help them understand that, these things actually have physical size and they will either fit together or they won't, right? And we've seen some of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking that the whole thing about the economics, I can think of a couple of very interesting examples of economics in Second Life. First of all, things like the breedables and the fashion for different breedables and how they've structured their sales so that you get your breedable and the market determines the price of individual breedables because you breed for special trays, and the market sets the price according to rarity. Whereas the creators continue to make money by selling the necessary foods and so forth. And I think it's a very interesting model to look at, and which ones succeed and which ones aren't so successful, and ways in which they sociologically, perhaps, if that's the right word, support by having things like groups of chat and build a community that can then support the whole economy of that individual thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I certainly think psychology plays a pretty big role in that sort of thing. And again, I think without kind of getting into details, but like if you don't feed your readables, and it's been a while since I really play around, like, you know, they definitely pull at your heartstrings, let's say, and
Yes.
encourage you to feed them.
Well, I think more broadly, Second Life is really a whole bunch of overlapping, interconnected experiments that are all happening at the same time, both from the development of Second Life right up through what all of the different resident communities are using it for, and of course the ongoing experiment of keeping it working.
Yes, which is a good one for you.
Right. Well, and you know, we often make the analogy that we're rebuilding the railroad from a moving train.
I see.
Oh, that
Right.
sounds like one of those comedy films where they're kind of running round to the back, picking up the tracks, running round to the front and putting them down in front while the train keeps moving throughout.
Right. Right. Except we're doing things like changing the gauge of the track.
Yeah.
I hear stories from the much older hands than I about the early days when they could actually take the grid down on, what was it, Wednesdays or something,
Yes.
and they would take the whole grid down for part of a day, and then they could change things and bring it back up. We don't get that luxury anymore.
Yeah, we don't do that.
I really envy that. I really do, but it's just not the
used to
world
be.
we live.
It used to be incredibly frustrating if you were European, because it would go down like morning for people on the West Coast, but for Europeans it was like the time you really wanted to come on, about 6 o'clock in the evening. Suddenly the grid would be down. It was sad.
The interesting thing, going back to the concept of experiments, most of those experiments that go on in world are actually what you might call accidental experiments. People do things and they stumble across business models that work and what have you. I would think you could probably actually construct economic experiments deliberately and try different models and see if you can extrapolate from the virtual into the physical worlds.
Well, someone who I know reverse engineered that. The Start of Caledon by Desmond Shang. What Des did was he went and started creating tulips, which he then started a tulip bubble, and with the money he raised from that, he bought the first sim for Caledon, which I always thought was great, because the famous Dutch tulip bubble of the 18th century, he kind of read up on that and did the same thing in Second Life.
Excellent.
So anyway, I was going to ask you both how you came to work at Linden Lab, and what were your first impressions when you joined? You've told us a bit about how you came. Your first impressions.
I'm gonna go first. So I talked a little bit about it, right? I mean, I came to work there because it's what I wanted to do. This is the space that I wanted to play in, and it made it my mission to come work here. My first impressions are, I think, awe. I think the word comes to mind. I think I've never before worked with such a talented group of people, and that remains true today. But I think that was also something that was took some getting used to. Not in any bad way, but yeah, I think it's just an amazing product, amazing group of people, amazing community, and amazing group of people to work with, and just I feel privileged every day to be able to do it.
How long have you actually been working at the lab?
Almost 8 years. So
okay.
8 years in August.
So you guys must have a really interesting experience in the whole business of things like company organization in real and virtual worlds. And I wonder how you find how much of what you do you find you can do in the virtual environment rather than having to have physical meetings. I know it's a very fundamental, basic, old question, but it's not one that I've had the opportunity to ask Linden for a long time.
We do a fair number of our routine meetings, things like status updates and just sort of general chatting about routine matters in world. I mean, I have probably 15 in-world meetings a week, not even counting the ones that are exist for meeting with residents. I actually don't find it very useful for the ones where you're trying to solve a problem, right? If you're really trying to work together with a group of people to solve a problem, to come up with a solution to something, or to resolve a dispute about something, then I find that using a video conference application is quite a bit superior. Now, not all Lindens agree with me on this, actually, but that's my personal take. Just because we have not in Second Life got the emotional bandwidth of understanding people's expressions and so forth. You can't use their body language because, of course, it's artificial and it's not what the person behind the avatar is doing.
Well, that's an interesting point. Yeah, sorry.
So we do both, but and that's sort of how I pick which one I want to use for any given thing.
Well, that raised an interesting question. I'm sorry, I stepped on you again.
No, that's fine. I was just going to echo what Oz said. I mean, I use both. Most of my meetings I do in world, but some I use video conferencing apps as well. And I'm a little bit more random about it than probably Oz is. He's clearly given this a lot of thought in terms of which medium to use. The only thing that I would add is that we work on a distributed team. We don't all work in the same office or the same location, and many of us don't work in offices at all. And adding the virtual world component, the Second Life component to our meetings makes it a little more water coolery or social. I don't know exactly how to put it, but like you come in wearing a different avatar, and it becomes a point of conversation. It's like a team building sort of thing before you get to your meeting.
Yeah, one of the women who works for Landon made a resolution, who's been here longer than I have, certainly. I don't know how she compares to you. I'm talking, has actually made a resolution a few years ago that she would come up with a new outfit every day. And so part of any meeting that you have with her is, what she got on today, and she comes up with the most amazing stuff. It's really great, and I mean that's part of the whole thing. Is
right
for people. I'm boring. I hardly change my avatar at all, and I have maybe a dozen outfits that
Let's pick up the business of expressions and stuff a little bit more, and ask you if in-world meetings would be enhanced if, for example, I on my desk here I have a little Asus 3D camera, And with a certain piece of software, I can get it to follow all my eye movements and mouth movements and where I'm looking and stuff like that. If we had that in Second Life, or I've got a leap here as well. If we had that sort of technology, would virtual meetings be more like real ones?
Probably. That there were experiments, old timers before my time, called puppeteering, where you could make your avatar follow real world movements. But if there are some technical hurdles with how the avatar is controlled that make that pretty difficult to do at scale. If a gathering like this, where we had a lot of people in a small space, if everybody were trying to do that, it would really be a big problem, even for modern internet bandwidth and latency.
This brings me to Project Bento, which is, of course, a big thing that you're working on at the moment. That is actually has the possibility of making faces more expressive, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Some of the stuff that I've been seeing people do as part of our, testing and the community's testing, more importantly, is really quite impressive.
Perhaps we could explain to people what Project Bento is for anyone in the audience who hasn't heard of it.
Right. Well, if you haven't, it's a very big thing and something we're really excited about. So, what we've done is added to the avatar skeleton. So the avatar skeleton is just what it sounds like, right? It's a set of bone-like constructs that govern the shape of your avatar and how it moves, right? So I've got a couple of bones in each arm and a couple of bones in the neck and one that moves my head around and one that moves my legs. And what we've done is added a whole bunch more detail to that. So there are now a large group of bones all the bones of the hand, right? So there are 5 fingers, each with a couple of joints. And we've added bones for a tail. We've added bones for a second set of limbs so that you can do quadrupeds easily. We've added bones for wings and a whole bunch of bones that rigged meshes can be rigged to for facial bones. So there's an extra set of bones for the eyes. I think it's 6 for the eyebrows and several for the mouth. I don't even keep track of what the final result counts for. But it's all of that can be manipulated using animations and cause the mesh of your avatar to move. Mesh avatars are going to have tremendously more expressiveness when this comes out.
Did an interview with a wolf for the Designing World show we did on Project Bento, and as he was talking to me, his eyes were widening and narrowing, his wolf ears were moving backwards and forwards, as he listened to me, he cocked an attentive ear. It was just fantastic.
Yes, and we can do lots of stuff with the lips and the tongue, everything.
And playing the guitar, yes, you'll be able to play the guitar and play a piano, play a harpsichord. It's just going to be amazing. We need to get animators doing things like that. Yes, Joe, you will be able to pick your nose.
Absolutely. But we're talking about animations here. We would not be expecting then, going back to my previous comment, in the longer term to be able to relate those new additional movement capabilities to things that we are actually doing in real life.
Not in real time. That is, the way a lot of animations are developed is by motion capture, right? So you you film somebody making a movement and then translate that into the same motions for the underlying skeleton, and you get a lot of great, obviously, dance moves. That's the way a lot of the coolest dance moves are
Right.
But doing that where you can pre-process it and figure it all out and break it down and then optimize it so that you're not capturing 1,000 data points for each movement is one thing. Doing it in real time where you have to track what's happening in real time and then get that expressed to everyone in Second Life, given the Second Life architecture, is pretty challenging. I mean, we may get to that point someday. It's not on our near-term roadmap.
And presumably the people who are actually doing that are using fundamentally different approaches to how those sort of things work.
Right.
I just had a lovely comment from Gio in the audience. He said, so as those Blender geeks were far in front of Mesh, now the mocap will be the new gurus.
Right.
I've already seen some amazing examples of stuff that people have done with the Bento avatars in terms of motion capture.
Yeah, and one thing that's actually very interesting about this process that's been going on around Project Bento is the way in which you guys have been working with residents to actually try things out and implement things and working together on them. Is that sort of a fundamentally new departure?
Well, I don't know that it's a complete departure. It certainly was a critical element of this project. We could not have done this project, and had we attempted it, we would not have done nearly as good a job as we have done by collaborating with a very talented group of residents. Early on, we recruited a bunch of content creators who had well-established reputations for excellence, and some of our own sort of in-house content creators, the moles, who do lots of those new avatars someone was admiring a bit ago. Actually, they ended up changing the priorities of the project very significantly. And as I said before, we weren't planning on doing 10 fingers when we started the project. We thought, wow, that's an awful lot of motion. It's an awful lot of new bones for just hands. And we weren't planning on doing anything like the number of facial bones that we ended up with. We were looking at wings and tails and maybe an extra set of limbs and maybe a few other things here and there. And when we got together with the content creators, they said, faces, hands, gotta have them.
Raised eyebrows.
Absolutely, right, exactly.
Yeah,
And
I've been
so
very for the raised eyebrows.
So we took that and ran with it, and that's what got us to where we are today. And that is something that we're trying to put more and more emphasis on, is collaborating with residents as much as we can figure out how to do on what our priorities should be and on how things should behave. It's customers are who tell you, what matters. So we've got to communicate with them to get that to happen.
Well, it's an interesting challenge that altogether, isn't it? The balance between internal and external, so to speak, because we as users don't actually know what you guys could get up to. We don't actually know what things you might have in your back pockets. It's kind of like if you went around asking people in 1984 what they would like what innovations they'd like in a personal computer, they would have said, "Oh, color screens and bigger storage and stuff like that, and or maybe faster." They wouldn't have said, "Oh, a Macintosh."
Right.
So there's an interesting balance to have there. Is kind of. You can imagine things that we couldn't imagine because you know it so much better and you're so intimately connected with it. But once you put those things out there, then we can help you guys actually point them in useful directions, and
Well,
also tell you whether they're sensible or not.
yeah, that's not actually the hardest part, though, and that's not actually the thing that provides the strongest counter pressure to deciding whether or not we're going to engage publicly about something. The biggest problem is that once we start talking about doing something publicly, people immediately leap to a bunch of conclusions about what it's going to be and how far it's going to go and how it's going to behave. And the truth is that most often with any really important change, we don't know what it is we're going to be able to accomplish until we get really quite far into it, right? So early in the Bento project, we started talking to people about things, and we said, this closed group, this is under NDA, and one of the things we did very early on was make an extended skeleton that just had 10 tentacle arms with 10 joints each, and did a bunch of performance testing of what happens if you sort of start waving all these tentacles around wildly. What's the effect, right? Do all the viewers fall over? Does the network get crushed? Does the simulator get confused, right? I mean, and it's entirely possible that we could have gotten partway into this project and then discovered that, yeah, we can add a pair of wings and a tail, but that's pretty much it. If we do more than that, we're gonna knock everybody down. And if we'd started talking early about having 10 fingers and 30 facial bones or whatever it is, and then it turned out we couldn't deliver, the end result of that project would have felt very different to the community than it has ended up doing, right? So
sure.
Often we're starting projects, we don't really know how they're going to come out, and how they're going to scale. And of course, Landon's team is responsible for keeping things going once we've put them out in the world. My team develops stuff and sort of, his team then tests it and then tries to deploy it and keep it operating 24/7. And that's
the goal, at least.
Right?
And presumably making sure it doesn't break half a dozen other things by mistake.
I mean, I think Oz is correct, and it certainly does fall on us to make sure that things are going to work correctly. But I would describe our relationship being much more collaborative than that. I mean, I think we work really closely together to make sure that we're shipping something that's gonna work for everyone.
Yeah. But early in the development, you don't always know.
Yeah.
We all take our best guess, and we try to figure out ways to simulate and test it. But the problem, one of the real fundamental challenges we have, is that there is no way to create a test bed that even remotely approximates the size and complexity of the real production Second Life grid with all of its residents. We just can't do it. I mean, there isn't enough computing, right?
Yeah.
So even if we built another whole grid, we'd have to build, a huge amount more stuff. We'd have to simulate everybody's viewers, and even then, we couldn't simulate all the wacky things that people do with it, right? I literally haven't had a week go by in 6 years at Second Life, literally not 1 week, where I didn't learn something new about either what our product was built to do or how some group of users has found a way to do something we never intended.
Oz and I joke about that all the time, but it's completely true. I would say every day, not every week. But it's this complex system, and we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in there using it every day, and you cannot imagine all of the things that people will do with it, right? And that's just one of the truly awe-inspiring things about Second Life.
One of the most common, sort of reactions that I find myself having in response to a description from users about what they are doing or what some problem they have or some new thing they want done, or something that they do every day, is to say, you're trying to do what? That works? I mean, it's just amazing. And despite the fact that, as I say, I've gone 6 years with that happening constantly, not even occasionally, constantly. I still am astonished at the fact that it just keeps happening. I keep being surprised. I keep waiting for I keep waiting for a week to show up where it doesn't happen. Hasn't happened yet. Not even close.
I always thought that one of the things that must have been very true of was the introduction of mesh, because the fact that people leapt on it at once and started making mesh hair and mesh clothes. I imagine that your original concept was that mesh was like for furniture and vehicles and maybe not. Oh, we can make hair with it.
I don't really know. Mesh was just coming in about the time I joined the company, and it was, so I didn't have I didn't get to see the beginning of the project when people were developing their limited conception of what it was going to be. So I can't say. Certainly, everything we've developed while I've been here has ended up being used in ways we didn't anticipate. Which is great. It's great.
Probably always the case, I should think.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like I said earlier. It's this giant ongoing experiment, and we just get to keep doing it.
Of course, as well as introducing new things, you actually also have to deal with challenges with old things. Which is the most challenging? The more challenging?
No comment.
Well, we put a lot of emphasis on not breaking old things. We also, at the same time, we have to constantly try to find ways to simplify the system enough that we can make its behavior predictable and reliable, right? So one of the things that we've been doing a lot over the last couple of years is saying there's more than one way to do something. Some of those ways are better than others. We're going to give people lots of warning, the third-party viewers especially, lots of warning that this particular set of the old ways is going to stop working. Invisiprims is maybe an example, and we got some of the functionality we needed from that Invisiprims were providing done in other ways that had good qualities, and some that we still haven't solved the water in boats problem. And that's unfortunate. It's regrettable, but there are pretty good reasons why that was a good trade-off to make. And I'm not really qualified to explain that in depth because I'm not a graphics guy, despite the fact that I'm working on Second Life. We're working on a transition like that with inventory now. We've been on a big program, been going for a year and a half now, to make inventory more reliable, so that people don't lose things. And we've made a huge amount of progress on that. But one of the things that we still have to do, and that we're in the process of doing now, is saying we're doing a version of the viewer that no longer uses some of the old interfaces and provides a model for how to do everything you need to be able to do with inventory using newer interfaces. They're not really new anymore. And sometime soon we will say, okay, as of this point in time, the old ways will stop working. And yes, there are some older viewers that will just not be able to do inventory anymore. It won't work because they'll get errors when they try to do some of their inventory operations. And that's sort of the process of moving forward, right? If we maintain 100% backwards compatibility, we would pretty soon grind to a complete halt.
Yeah.
I can certainly imagine, and presumably, the deeper you go, the more likely you are to encounter things that you just can't do anything about. And there's presumably down there some sort of 13-year-old technology which you really can't do anything about.
And some very, very tired hamsters.
Yes, exactly. All those hamsters.
Yes,
They've been doing it for
there
such a long time.
There are deeply fundamental things that there's just no way to touch anymore, right? I mean, you can build on top of them, but you can't go back and change them, right? Because there are certain assumptions built into all the code about how something works, and therefore, if you touch it, you run the risk of breaking almost everything.
Yeah, right. And presumably, we should be moderately pleased in the sense that we're still here and it works better than it ever did and it looks better than it ever did.
Yes.
And it's it's so tedious when you read an article about Second Life and it's showing things that looking at them were from like 2007 when I first got here, and the person writing has obviously never been here for the last N years. How much things have changed, and it's still, there is that ancient engine deep in the bowels with its big gear wheels and steam engines creaking round, and it's still working.
Yeah, but we have found ways to continue to expand.
Yeah,
what's possible and
absolutely.
how well we do it.
And you've really succeeded too. I don't think anybody here would disagree with that.
Oh, that's good to hear. It's very good to hear.
I've got a couple of questions from the audience, if you would be happy to take them.
We'll do what we can.
Okay. The first one comes from Angie Mornington. And she says, what does inventory cache do when you clear it?
Okay. All right. So to start with, it helps to explain what the inventory cache is, right?
Right.
So the inventory is a great big. Your inventory is a bunch of rows in a database, and each of those rows has a name associated with it and a pointer to something in the underlying asset system. So, my coat, your hair, all these things are the object itself is in the asset system, and might have pointers to it from many people's inventories, but your inventory is how you organize it, right? That's a lot of data, right? People have inventories with 100,000 or 200,000 items in them. And if every time you logged in, you had to read all of that, it would very noticeably slow down how long it took you to log in.
Right.
It can take quite a while. So your inventory cache is literally just a copy of all that data that's kept locally on your computer. And when you've got it, your computer can, when you start up Second Life, it can just look at the real inventory and say, how close is this to what I've got stored locally? And if there are differences, I can get the differences. And that means that you can access that information very much more quickly, right? You can get what your outfit should be, or whatever it is. And so it used to be true with, I am told, with some regularity, that information on your local copy would get badly out of sync with what was in the real inventory, the one on the servers. And the only way to make things behave correctly and actually be there correctly was to delete your local copy and get a completely fresh copy from the server. And that's what clearing your cache means. It means delete my local copy of everything I know about my inventory and fetch it all again next time I log in. And that slows you down. It's only actually of any value if the information in your local inventory cache in your local copy was bad. And these days, that's actually really unusual. It has become kind of folklore that you can solve almost any problem by deleting your inventory cache. It's really not true most of the time. It should be, at best, a very, very last resort these days, because we've done a lot to make it more reliable. So that's what you're doing. You're forgetting everything you know, and you have to reload it all again.
Right. Which is why you need to go somewhere like Pooley and stand deep in the ocean while it reloads.
Yes, right. That's and that too. It used to be, because it was being loaded over a less reliable internet protocol than we're using now. That used to really have a big effect. These days, it's not so much. It's just that it takes a lot of time.
Right. I've got a couple of other questions. One about reflections in Second Life, and it's from Paulo Gibbs, and he asks if you guys have given any thoughts about adding cube map reflection to Second Life. And he says it's already possible to simulate the effect with projector lights, and he's not entirely sure if we know about that. I definitely don't know about that. This is all Greek to me, but maybe you have more of a clue what this is.
Right. Well, actually, I saw an excellent YouTube video on the kind of simulating of reflections for bouncing lights just recently. It was great. But real reflections, mirror style reflections, which is what cube map reflections gets you. We have looked at it. There was an open source prototype implementation of a limited implementation of reflections a while ago. And as I said a few minutes ago, I am not a graphics guy. I'm a network protocols guy. And what I know about graphics, I could write on a few sheets of paper.
Right.
So when that came around, I took it to the graphics guys, and we have good ones. And I said, "What about this?" And they said, "Don't go there."
I see.
You end up with, all the examples that we were being presented with were a single mirror on a perfectly flat surface in a relatively uncrowded area where there wasn't a lot of tricky lighting going on and there weren't a lot of avatars there. And as soon as basically what you have to do to implement a reflection is you have to pretend that you're re-rendering the entire scene from a different perspective, and then you take a slice from that perspective and project it onto a surface, right? So imagine that that the wall near you is a mirror, right? Or let's say this wall behind me is a mirror, where the SL13B sign is.
Yes.
The way to simulate what should appear in that mirror is to put another camera behind that wall, treat the wall as clear, and then re-render this entire scene. And then take the piece of that rendering that would be visible through that hole in the wall and render it on the wall. So you need to re-render the entire scene for each reflective surface. Now picture what happens if you've got two of them. Right? Now you've got to do it twice, and you maybe have to account, do you have to account for the fact that, the infinite mirrors problem? You've got two mirrors facing each other.
Yeah, that's right.
How many times do you render that to make that come out right? And then think about, what do you do if the surfaces aren't flat? Now you have to render the whole scene and then distort it based on the shape of the surface that you're mapping that image onto. The complexity goes up exponentially really fast in a bunch of different dimensions, and basically the graphics guys said, if what you wanted is kill the performance of every viewer in the world, do that.
So what about vertical water?
Well, water reflections are basically a low-res version of exactly that, but it's the low-res that's the key, and the fact that we only have one surface.
Right. I mean, but wouldn't it give you the basic functionality? Sorry?
And you can turn them off, right? Not everybody has water reflections turned on.
Yeah.
True.
They are a moderately expensive thing to have enabled.
They're
But it's
an
essentially the
advanced
same
item.
tech. It's just that we're only doing it once, and because we know we're distorting it by rippling the surface, we can do a pretty crummy quality reflection, and you won't notice because it's rippled anyway.
I'm going to ask now how you guys are for time. We have time after this interview. We can carry on going for a little longer because we're getting some questions in. But
good.
if you need to go.
I'm good for a while longer.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, great. Because I was going to ask you, this is I think is a really fun question from Freya, who says, how about something like an undo button in Second Life? I can't count the times when I accidentally deleted a wall or floor of my house and then had to res the whole house again, or when I made a mistake in settings. An undo button would solve that problem.
Seconded.
Oh, yes.
And thirded.
If that's ish is the tricky part of that response, Joe. In order to do undo, and it's a classic example, you can read about architectures for doing undo. In fact, it's a very common example in a lot of design pattern books in computer science. You have to keep track of everything you did. So picture everything that might be happening around you in Second Life, and imagine how much information you have to store in order to be able to reverse it. Oh, and by the way, you also have to have a way to reverse any given action, right?
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy if what you've got is text being typed in an editor window, right? All you have to do is remember what was the sequence of keystrokes, play them backwards, right?
Right.
But if what you're talking about is the creation and linking of a bunch of prims and the texturing of them and the distorting of them, and it just keeps getting more and more complicated all the time, right? So it's not impossible, and within some limits, it's a pretty achievable thing, but how large a community are we serving by making that change, as opposed to doing things like adding new bones to skeletons and enabling the creation of really radically cool non-human avatars and things. We just have to pick our targets, right?
Sure, you can't do everything.
Yes.
We'd like to do everything.
And one can imagine that even if you think of a complicated application like one of the Adobe packages like Premiere or Photoshop, even that is probably pretty simple compared with the degrees of complexity that you're going to be having to deal with and store and manipulate if you were doing it in World.
Well, I'm sure that I have an inadequate understanding of the complexity of those things, but I have a pretty scary image of the complexity of Second Life. So.
Right.
Okay, another question. This is from Vampire Hunter, who says, a question concerning the Bento avatar. Will we be able to keep our old world avatars versus these new ones? Skins, clothing all cost a great deal of money for those of us that are vain. Also, will we lose the system clothes since they don't work on mesh?
Well, first, before I answer that, I want to tell you that one of the communities in Second Life that just endlessly fascinates me is the whole vampire subculture. I think this is just amazing. So good to hear from you. But no, the Bento avatars are an extension of the standard avatar. So they are a superset. And there's nothing about that new technology layered on top of the existing avatar that alters the existing avatar. So you should be just fine to keep using your existing avatars as long as you want to, as far as we know. Certainly nothing about Bento limits that in any way. And everybody who knows me knows that I'm a real stick in the mud, and it'll probably be ages before I get around to adopting a Bento extension to my avatar. I have a couple of ideas, but I'll probably be slow about implementing them. System clothes at this point don't work on meshes, right? You can't put a system texture-based shirt or tattoo layer over a mesh body. But if you're continuing to use the system avatar base, all of that will continue to work exactly the way it does now.
Yeah. Well, that's good news. I think we're probably coming to the end of the questions, unless there's going to be another zip in. Joe, that was just those are somewhat people who are just popping into, jumping on the stage, and we're asking them to leave as quickly as we can. Politely, fairly politely. Okay, I was going to ask now, what aspects of your job do you love most, and what do you find most challenging?
Well, I'll jump in, but I think we talked about this a little bit. I think my answer is the same. It's that it's just this amazing, complex system, and I learn something every single day I come to work, right? And whether it's about the system itself or about life, I mean, it's this amazing system that is just full of wonder. I learn something all the time. That is the thing that I love the most about it. It is also the thing that is most challenging, right? It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen on any given day, and certainly I know that Oz can appreciate this as well, that you find new and unexpected things crop up, and it makes it very difficult to plan. I mean, one of the things that I would love to be able to do is to commit to me having something done on any particular day, but that makes it really difficult due to the kind of complexity of what we've done and the kind of unexpected things that crop up. Oz and I talk about that a bunch as well, right? I mean, I think there are certain things like security issues that might come up, and you have to drop whatever you're doing and take care of that right immediately, because that is the most critical thing. But we do so at the expense of all these other wonderful things that we want to be working on and delivering. And that's the probably the most challenging thing about what we do. At least for me.
we often find ourselves 3 levels deep in emergencies.
Yeah.
You're and I'm not exaggerating. You're working on problem A. Problem B that's much more urgent suddenly comes up. You have to start working on problem B. Then you have to drop that to work on problem C. And then you have to remember, okay, what was I doing before B? It's true. And I have to say, Landon's team, they're the people who keep the grid and everything behind it, and you can't even imagine how much there is behind it, going all the time. And they've done one of the things that's happened just in the last couple of years that wasn't happening when I got here is that Landon's team has started putting out regular reports about just what went on when some big event happened. And Landon started the trend with a fairly famous blog post about that at one point. And it's just astonishing, the level of complexity that they deal with every day and how well they cope with spectacular, multiple simultaneous failures. I mean, when you've got a system really big, right? When you've got as many different components as we have, it's no longer a question of whether or not something's going to fail on any given day. Something is going to fail. You just don't know what it is. And on some really bad days, it's going to be more than one thing. And if those things interact, then you're really in deep sneakers. And his team is just amazing at how they do it. And the other thing that is just fascinating I've had the privilege of being able to hire some people and bring them in and acquaint them with Second Life, which is a process we call drinking from the fire hose. But I've hired some pretty amazingly talented people, and I get the same reaction from all of them. Most of them were people who were familiar with Second Life before they came. We try to do that, but they come and they begin to learn how it all really works, how it all is put together, and the reaction is uniform. This is amazing. This is amazing. We're doing things nobody else is doing, and we're doing things on a scale that almost nobody else is doing. And it's just astonishing to come in and see it all, and see that it keeps working every day. And it's creative and it's fun, and you get to constantly be exposed to to the crazy things that people are doing. And my favorite example, which I learned early on, is how many other places can you work where it's a perfectly normal thing to go into a meeting and say, "Hey, can anybody here see my pants?" I mean, it's actually happens all the time.
I see.
Your tail's missing again. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's it's an endlessly creative thing and an amazingly stable organization. I mean, we just keep moving along all the time, and I'm privileged to have the very best part of my job is the fact that I've got such a tremendous team of people who have such dedication to making this happen. The level of passion is just incredible.
Excellent.
Hear, hear.
I would say that this might sound slightly rude, but I would say that the level of passion is higher than ever among the smaller team, which might sound a bit weird, but I feel that the people who stayed with Second Life when others went off to Sansa are the people who are so passionate about it.
Well, that's exactly true. That, and there's nothing. There shouldn't be anything surprising about that. It was a self-selection process, right? I mean, some people wanted to go work on the new thing, and more power to them. I hope that they, we all hope that they succeed brilliantly and embarrass us with how much better it is. But I think in many ways it's just going to end up being very different. It's going to have some. I know it's going to have some ways in which it's going to be just amazingly better. But it's not going to have initially, as everyone has said publicly, the level of diversity and scope that Second Life has, because you simply can't build anything as big as Second Life has been built in whatever it is, 15 years, 13 publicly, and significant time before that. But you just can't turn around and do that in a couple of years. But the people who, I was lobbying to get the job I've got now about the time we were really beginning to need to ramp up the commitment to Sansar and begin really taking people off of Second Life to go do it. I literally went around to everybody who was doing things, and what I asked them was, if what you want is to keep working on Second Life, then I want you on my team.
Right.
Right. And that's how we got, the people who are primarily responsible for within Landon's organization for maintaining Second Life and driving Second Life. That's those people were, right? And the people who are doing the development, that's who those people are. They were the ones who wanted to be involved in Second Life and continuing to make it better. And we kind of see it as a challenge. It's like Sansar is out there trying to do better on everything that we do, and we're just, and more power to them. I hope they succeed. Let me be clear about that. But I also see it as my mission to keep raising the bar they have to get over.
Right.
I was going to say, a sort of general question. Where do you see Second Life going? What do you see as the future?
Oh, gee, I'm not even could predict that. The way we do things is that we get together, the whole team, a couple of times a year. We've been doing this for a couple of years now. A couple of times a year, we get everybody together in one place, off out of our regular work environment, and we get in a few conference rooms, and we throw out ideas about what needs to be done, or we describe problems that need to be solved. And Bento came out of one of those a year and a bit ago, where an engineer stood up and said, here's the skeleton, here's what it can and can't do, and here's what we can do about it while maintaining backwards compatibility. And that was the beginning of the project, right? 6 months before that, nobody would have predicted that we were going to do anything even remotely like that. I don't think I could any more predict what we're going to be doing a year from now than I could predict what it was that some group of residents is doing right now that's going to present me with a big problem next week. Neither of those is predictable.
So just to add to that, I mean, I would agree, and I think my answer is pretty unsatisfying. In that, the thing I love about Second Life is that it's you can't predict where it's going to go, right? And there are a couple of things that I probably would say about it. I think I'm expecting Bento to be a huge step for content in Second Life, and we were talking about the economics of it a little bit ago. Going back to Mesh, right? Mesh was a very fundamental addition to what you could do with content creation in Second Life, and it was adopted very quickly, and it became huge, and did a lot to invigorate the Second Life economy. That is the thing that's important. That's the thing that keeps Second Life new and interesting and relevant 13 years into its run. I'm expecting Bento to be similar in its impact on Second Life, and that I certainly cannot in any way predict what people are going to be able to do with it. I just know that it's going to be an important part of what Second Life looks like and how people use Second Life in the years to come.
Do you think that Oculus Rift is significant in Second Life's future? Or that kind of virtual reality headset?
It's a pretty amazing experience. We'll be coming out with a new version of the Rift viewer shortly.
Oh, cool. So
and-
that'll work with the production units, will it?
Yeah.
Excellent.
We have one or two things that really need to get fixed, and we're putting on a full court press to try to get those done.
Do you have a timescale for that?
You remember what I said about not?
Yeah.
What Landon said about not
See our previous comment.
You know what? Ebby asks me those questions all the time, and he gets the same answers you're getting. I'm not kidding. He doesn't like it very much, yeah, I'm sure you did. And he turned around and asked me. But I don't know whether it's going to have a big impact. I really don't. It's an extra filter, right? It's pretty cool. I mean, especially for just wandering around. But it requires that you have a headset, right? And
Right.
that's so. In terms of the scale of its impact, I think it'll probably be pretty limited for a little while until the costs on those things begin to come down. And we'd like to find ways to support some of the cheaper ways to get some of those effects. But if what you want is the real immersivity of being inside you really do need the high resolution wraparound screen with good optics and a quite high frame rate. 2020. Geez, I can't predict what's going to happen in 2017. I'm not even going to think about 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just pile on a little bit, and I'll probably get myself into a little bit of trouble by going this far. But the one thing I can say about Oculus, I think it is very cool. I've gotten into Second Life with one of the development kit 2s, and I thought it was the coolest thing. I've seen people go and do it. I think it's really cool. I think one of the things that one of the problems that we have with this new wave of VR technology today is that you're just not very much content, and Second Life has the at least the kind of surface ability to deliver a lot of content for VR. The thing I think is really limited is that, and I'm one of the people that gets really motion sickness and get motion sick in general. The technology behind Second Life it's going to be extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to deliver the frame rates necessary to have a comfortable experience in VR. So I think that, there is a reason why we're doing Sansar, right? And that's one of the reasons. I think it will be interesting. This is just my prediction. It will be interesting to use Oculus in Second Life, but it's difficult for me to see that it will get to the point where it can be a comfortable experience for a mass market of consumers using Oculus. Again, as Oz said, I can't predict what's going to happen 2 weeks from now. I'm not going to say what's going to happen over the next 4 years when I think the VR market will explode to the point where it will be a very, very common thing for people to have in their homes.
I think that's a pretty good point. Certainly, a pretty good point about the frame rate. So just when you said that, I called up mine to see how far short of 90 frames per second I am sitting here. I've got a low draw distance. I think I've got high graphics. I've got advanced lighting on. And my frame rate is 11. Which actually is quite good for here. But, I'd have to get another 80 frames per second. And ain't going to happen, I don't think.
It's a really, really hard problem. And no small amount of the time we spend working on Sansar goes into that very problem.
Right. But that requires focus on that as a goal in every part of the system as you go forward, right?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
the weak link is what determines what your, you know, what determines what your outcome is. So it's going to be very, very challenging to make a smooth experience, which isn't to say that it's not pretty cool. You know, you put it on, you can stand around and look around. You got to be careful how you move. You know, one of the things that when I got my first demo, which was well over a year ago now, they wouldn't let me move. They sat me down in a chair and they said, we're not going to give you a mouse and we're not going to give you a keyboard. We're going to put the thing on you and you can just look around. But if you try to move, you're going to need this wastebasket in front of you. And by the way, it's right between your knees. I didn't need it, by the way. I got away with it. But, you know, they had to coach me quite a bit on how to avoid the motion sickness. Now, it's actually improved tremendously since then, both because the Oculus technology has improved and because our exploitation of it has improved. But it's some people still have a fair amount of trouble with it, and it's never going to be as smooth as you would want it to be in Second Life.
My personal suspicion is that one of the problems with VR hardware as we do it at the moment is that we only deal with eye convergence and not with focus. I know there is some research being done on focus, but I have a strong suspicion that if we had a situation where you could, on the one hand, engage depth of field in the virtual world, and on the other, have the ability to detect how far away things were that people were looking at, for example, via convergence, or if necessary, then using other methods like reflecting things off the pupils and stuff. But probably convergence would be sufficient. Then you could change the focus for the viewer, and I suspect that would take away a lot of the nausea.
Yeah, there are actually there's a lot of really interesting research going on in how to reduce nausea. The one I thought was really funny is that it turns out that it helps to draw somebody's nose. You can see your own nose. You're almost never aware of it, but if you look at it, you can see it. It turns out that your brain is using that to help figure out your orientation. And if you draw the nose inside VR, it reduces the frequency and severity of nausea. So we haven't added that to the Second Life viewer yet, but we have talked about it. And there are some other tricks you can play with, like when people are moving, you give them a little bit of tunnel vision, take away some of the periphery, and that's another one that people have found makes. And just the fact that people are doing a lot of this now is tremendously increasing how much we know. I mean, literally every couple of weeks, somebody publishes a new paper about this stuff. So over the next few years, it's going to be a very different story.
So I have a really quick story to tell. Just because I've developed a term that I really love, but early on, this was months ago, probably even like something like a year ago, I was in Second Life. We use an Oculus Rift, and like I said, I think the amount of content that's out there is obviously just unparalleled, right? And so just getting around and looking at things, and it's very interesting. The content itself in Second Life was never really designed for VR, and so the tricks that we use to kind of simulate spaces inside of Second Life don't translate well to VR. So like billboard textures look like billboards, right? Instead of having any kind of depth, right? So like that's one of the things. But it's still fun to get in and play around. But again, I get really I'm very sensitive to motion sickness, and I'm kind of being very careful. I'm kind of walking around like it's like, okay, it's feeling pretty good, and then for whatever reason. And so, by the way, like one of my children was with me when I was doing this, and we saw this butterfly in one of our regions, and this thing is rideable.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And she's like, "What is that butterfly? What's the butterfly?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay, B. This is you'll find this will be fun." So I hopped onto the butterfly and started flying around, and immediately I just started getting violently ill. It was just the worst experience. I don't know what it was about the beating wings of this thing. I could not figure it out. Like immediately, I had to pull the thing off. I was done. And so from that point on, I call it like, right, if I'm feeling sick in VR, it's because I'm riding the butterfly.
Well, there's an interesting expression.
Yeah.
That'll probably
I'm sure
pass
there's
into the urban myths of
I'm sure there's a
reality.
metaphor there somewhere, but
Yeah.
I was going to say, you probably don't want to watch our last show and you Designing World show, and you probably don't want to go to the place where we filmed it, because we went to an amusement arcade, which is absolutely packed with roller coasters and all kinds of rides. And if you tried it, it's quite amazing, because you get the sensations you get in a fun fair where you're going up and down without the gravity pressure. And it's really, it's interesting how authentic the experience feels, but you'd probably not want to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm just looking at it, not even in VR.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming here, but I think we probably should wrap up now. We've done an extra half hour of this talk, and it's been absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us. Very much appreciated.
Oh, it's
Thank you for
always
having
fun.
us.
It's been great, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again at some point.
For sure.
And very nice to meet
Happy-
Landon for the first
a happy
time.
Second Life birthday for everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Happy Second Life birthday. Thank you to our guests, Oz Linden and Landon Linden, and my co-host, Elrik Merlin. We have another talk at 5 p.m, which is going to be historic role play. And we're particularly going to be looking at people from the 18th century. I need to run away and change into something respectable. And tomorrow we have another set of talks. We've got some brilliant things coming up tomorrow, including Ziola and Pete Linden, who'll be here at 3 p.m. And we'll also, hang on a sec, I can give you the rundown. We've got non-profit, Meet the Non-Profit at 9 o'clock. And we'll be talking to Zinnia, who's one of the mentors. She'll be giving a presentation then. Then we have Meet the Designers at 12 noon. Is a certain Jo Yardley? Anyone heard of her?
Who's that?
At,
Name rings a bell.
Name does ring a bell, definitely.
Yeah.
Then, as I said, at 3 p.m. we have Pete and Ziola. And at 5 p.m. in Meet the Community, we'll be talking to people from Firestorm, Ed Merriman and Jessica Lyon. And that should be good, because we can be talking about the way they're building the community for new residents on their Sims. So, good day of talks tomorrow. I hope people will be able to make it.
And thanks for coming to hear us today
Cheers.
Brilliant.
and for your contributions.
And Will Webb is asking the Lindens to drop something in the time capsule, something of now.
Something of now.